Good morning and welcome to Live with Lewis for August 5th, 2004. We welcome all of our internet viewers and all of those watching this broadcast later in its archive format. We're coming to you today from historic Fort Atkinson, located in Fort Calhoun, Nebraska. We're just about 20 minutes above the city of Omaha on the bluffs high above the Missouri River floodplain here in Nebraska. It's a beautiful day, a beautiful sunny day. We've had some great weather lately. And as always, we're going to start our broadcast with a little bit of business and then talk about what happened 200 years ago. We'd like to remind our viewers that they can send us email questions at Lewis and Clark, that's all spelled out, LEWISANDCLARK, Lewis and Clark at Clayton, K12.mo.us. That's Lewis and Clark at clayton.k12.mo.us. And we encourage you to send your email questions to us throughout today's program or at any time if you have questions pertaining to either the original expedition, any of these broadcasts, or the reenactment expedition that's taking place. Thanks again for joining us. And as I mentioned, we're coming to you from historic Fort Atkinson, Nebraska, but that is, of course, a name given to this place much later. This land here that we're visiting in today, the traditional homeland of the Otoe-Missouria people, the land that Lewis and Clark found their first contact with the Native American population west of the Mississippi River. And it's an exciting week as we look back at what happened on the original expedition as well as the experiences that we've had. We've got two great guests with us today, and we appreciate you all taking the time to join us. As I mentioned, 200 years ago at this very spot that we're located at, actually probably not the actual piece of land we're sitting on during the broadcast here, but very, very near this place, and we're going to take some footage of the area around here throughout today's program, but very near this place, Lewis and Clark and the members of the original Corps of Discovery 200 years ago on what would have been Tuesday of this week, the 3rd of August, held council with members of the Otoe-Missouria people. Now, this was two smaller tribes that had combined, who lived in this area, tribes that were originally peoples who had peopled the area around the Great Lakes and had moved to this area by the early part of the 18th century, had been forced this way, and had called this area home. These folks were agrarian. They had raised a lot of crops. They lived in permanent settlements in this area. And we're going to be talking with a member of the Otoe-Missouria tribe a little later about this. And this area that we are in was where Lewis and Clark first met with these people on the 2nd of August, after having sent out some emissaries from the Corps to make contact with the local village. Members of the tribe came down on the 2nd. They brought gifts of food and invited the Corps to meet with them the next day. And indeed, on the 3rd, a significant council was held with the leadership of the Otoe-Missouria, as well as Lewis and Clark and the interpreters that they had with them to communicate. And it was the first of what would prove to be many encounters that the Corps would have with sovereign nations and First Nations along their western trek, and certainly the portion between here and Mandan. Some of the other interesting things that took place during this week 200 years ago. On the 3rd, of course, the council. On the 4th, it's noted in the journals that one of the men has come up missing, or at least has not returned from a outing that he was sent on. That man was a man by the name of Moses Reed. And indeed, on the 5th, 200 years ago today, the journals record, Clark records in his journals that they have reason to suspect that he has deserted. And in just a few days, there will be a party of 4 men sent out to bring him back dead or alive. And so that's sort of the turn that the trip is taking at this point. This young group of individuals, these men and their few horses and dog and their boats, are moving into an area that now is occupied by another people. And indeed, not just another people, but the flora and the fauna, again, changing dramatically. Lewis records on this day 200 years ago that for the first time, after having wanted to take a closer look at them, he has been able to actually finally collect a specimen of the least tern, in fact 2 specimens of the least tern, and describes those birds in great detail in his journals as well. So we're starting to see the flora and the fauna really becoming a major part of the journaling. In fact, it stimulates Lewis's writing, actually. He's been not necessarily very faithful to the journals. We know that some of the journals may be missing, but we actually see that the encounters with the native people as well as the native flora and fauna stimulates him with regard to his journalistic endeavors. We're going to talk now a little bit about what's happened this week to us as we've made our way along the river corridor from the Omaha area up this far. And we've been here for quite a time because this is a signature event. We've been part of a signature event, part of the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial commemoration taking place here in Fort Calhoun, just north of Nebraska. Omaha, Nebraska. And we're going to go back now and take a look at some of the footage that we have shot over the past week and some of the activities that we've been engaged in. So here we are. We're going to take a look at the week ensuing since our last broadcast to you all from Dodge Park. And here you see us at Dodge Park Marina. We're visiting there with members of the Mouth of the Platte Trail Heritage Foundation, and these folks are who are very active. They volunteer to do a lot of the work during the Bicentennial signature event here, and these folks came out to share with us a little bit about the history of that community. We're going to take a look in just a moment at some other things, but I'd mentioned that that broadcast was that was from our last broadcast there in what is actually Florence, Nebraska, just north of the town of Omaha, city of Omaha. Now we're going to take a look at some of the things that took place with the signature event. We're going to start off with Steve Allen, the new superintendent of the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trails, the man who replaced Gerard Baker, and we certainly want to send our hello out to Gerard Baker and let him know that we all miss him and hope him well at Rushmore, where he's the on site there now. So wish him well on that. So we're going to take a look now at this footage from the last week. Jim, if you would.
It is especially important to recognize that the American Indians participating in these signature events are not entertainers. They are educators. They are sharing ancient cultural traditions and sacred moments with you. They are reaching out across a wide cultural chasm to welcome you to their homeland.
Here you see us during the opening ceremonies. If you notice, and we made a point of making this clear to the public why we were doing this. If you notice the weapons, they're all being carried in the secure position. It was very important to the original expedition to follow the military protocol for such a parley, and as you see, the weapons were carried in the secure position, making it clear to our native hosts that we came in peace, that this was a mission of peace and friendship. And here you see Daniel Schlossberg, who portrays Pierre Crozat across the country, performing, as well as Native American dancers here inviting the public into the circle to join them in a traditional dance, helping to share cultures and lead to deeper understanding between the many peoples that participated in this signature event. And of course, one of the other highlights of the signature event was the unveiling of the new keelboat Nickel, and the folks from the U.S. Mint were here to share their thoughts. Gloria Eskridge, who has been largely responsible, one of the strong forces behind making this new commemorative nickel a priority and a reality. Gary Moulton, of course, noted author and editor of the comprehensive and complete works of the Lewis and Clark journals. They're speaking. And here we are at Boyer's Chute at our camp. Now, this has been a long camp for us, and it's actually in a chute, a small channel that runs between it comes off the river, and there's an island between it and the main channel of the river. We've been there for some time. The river's rather shallow, so the pirogues are at our base camp, and the keelboat's been down. Here you see the pirogues located near the base camp. Many, many visitors making their way down there at Boyer's Chute, this Nebraska Game and Park facility. The keelboat was located some great distance, about 3/4 of a mile away from the pirogues, and near the mouth of the chute in the event that the water were to drop, so that we could get it back into the main channel. And we were pleased to see the number of visitors who made their way all the way down there on foot, who had to walk all the way down there, but they certainly enjoyed themselves. Many of them even joined us in the chute for a cool dip to wet off before they made their way back. And probably the most exciting thing of the whole week was the reenactment of and dedication of this new meeting place artwork here at a site very close to where the original council took place. And of course, we were involved in a reenactment of that, and we were most pleased, deeply honored, and deeply moved to share in a very special moment when Bud Clark, you see here, one of the three descendants, Bud Clark, Churchill Clark, and Joshua Loftus, descendant of George Shannon, joined us and the rest of the Corps as we actually greeted Bat Shonatona. Now here you see us as we're actually carrying the yard arm with the sail on it from our base camp at Boyer's Chute, something over 3 miles or so, and we decided to carry the awning up and set the awning up, the sail as the awning for the council, as was done 200 years ago. And you can see there the long walk we made. We were pleased and privileged to do this as an act of of our respect for and concern for the future welfare of the Otoe-Missouria people and their culture in this area. As you see, we're putting up the awning very quickly, and like it was 200 years ago, the awning would provide the shade for the council so that the principal players, Lewis and Clark, and the leadership of the Otoe-Missouria could sit in the shade and get to know one another a little bit, and that's what we took advantage of this opportunity to do ourselves. Bat Shonatona, who was a keynote speaker at many of the events throughout the signature event, and was very involved in the Otoe-Missouria cultural preservation, took the time to sit with us and talk to us about his people and the heritage of the Otoe-Missouria, and so we were very pleased to have that moment with him, and we shared several tokens of our esteem with him, giving him some remembrances that he might take home with him, and hopefully make this a special time for us today, not just as a remembrance of what happened 200 years ago, but we assured him that our primary mission here is with their people is to let the First Nations have their voice, and we assured him that we would do all we could do to restore the hoop of trust between Native and non-Native peoples. And certainly the time we spent with him and the time that we're going to be dedicating over the next several months to Native American programming hopefully will be indicative of our commitment to that. One of the certain highlights was Mike Brewer, a good friend, had made this ceremonial pipe before we left. He could not come on the trip, and he asked me to carry it with him and use it at the councils. This was the first time that this pipe was used, and as you can see, the mouthpiece is the head of an eagle, Pajutawambli, and the hands grasped together in the middle, signifying friendship and peace, taken from the original Jefferson Peace Medal. And there, Jim Swinson in the rear acting as Old Dorian, interpreter for the First Council. It has truly been an amazing week on the river. It's truly been an amazing time for us, members of the Discovery Expedition, to have the opportunity to get to know Missouri Otoe and Otoe-Missouria people here in the area and learn more about their culture and their homeland. So it's been a very exciting time. We again encourage you to send your email questions to Lewis and Clark at clayton.k12.mo.us. And now we're going to turn our attention to our featured piece this week, and we're going to talk about some of our featured guests. We're very happy today to be joined by John Slater from the Fort Atkinson Interpretive Center here and Historic Site. Thank you for being here today, John.
Thank you, Scott, and welcome you to Fort Atkinson.
Now, I asked you earlier, site supervisor, site superintendent.
Site superintendent.
Site superintendent. Now, it seems like for a guy to have a job like that, he probably have to work at a place like 30 years or something. How long have you been here?
About 30 years.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the place we are? Now, this was, and I'm going to just introduce a little bit about, from what I know, Fort Atkinson, built in 1820, garrison until 1827. 6th Infantry was here, a rifle regiment was here.
Yes,
purpose to interact with Native Americans. Tell us a little bit about the place beyond that.
Well, the basic purpose, or the initial purpose, was the protection of the fur trade, and not from anything else but the incursions by the British fur companies into the upper Missouri River area. They were to establish military forts all the way up to the mouth of the Yellowstone, but this was the only post that they actually built as a result of the Yellowstone expedition of 1818.
And this, when it was built, was the largest fortification in Western America, correct?
It was the largest military post in the United States at all. There were over 1,000 men stationed at this site.
And at that particular time, we did not have a huge, large standing army, so that was a significant troop strength was here.
Yeah, it was about 1/6 of the total standing army of the United States at that time.
Okay. Now, tell us a little bit. So, what led? First of all, we talk about, we know why it was here. It was here to create a safe and secure environment, to project power in an area where the British were still testing us a little bit. Why the change? Why did the fort ultimately? Why was 7 years the terminus of it? What changed that dynamic that led to the fort being abandoned?
What changed was that the Missouri River was not the way to the west. The route up the Platte River, and then there was heavy traffic on the Santa Fe Trail system that was there, and troops were needed more and further south from this location, and that was basically the impetus to move them out of this area and then back down to Jefferson Barracks and then eventually up to Fort Leavenworth.
Okay, so when the fort is abandoned, 1827, certainly everyone who was living here didn't just didn't leave or just dissipate. Certainly, by 1827, I guess there are people who are starting to homestead here and farm and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
No, actually, pretty much, or most people did leave the location. There were some, and very few, fur traders and those types of situations. The Indian agent was moved down to Bellevue at that time, but most of the people occupying, or as far as the white people occupying this area, they did move further south.
So after the fort is abandoned, most of the white population's moved out. So we still have a native population living in this area. And so what happens, or how does the dynamic change after the military? What was it with the military and the native population when they were here? And then when the military leaves, how does that affect the relationship of the governmental relationship with the native people?
It was the dynamic between the two civilizations was generally a friendly situation. The treaties were held here. There was some minor infractions both ways, but in a general sense, this was an area that was, or the relationships were generally in a good stead. This area was purchased from the Omaha tribe for goods, an area, a military reservation of a 15-mile square. When they initially set up this site. So it was, and this building behind us was used for many treaties. In fact, 3 treaties in 1825, one with the Pawnee, with the Omaha, and also with the Otoe. So treaties were signed here as part of a treaty expedition of 1825 that did go all the way up to the mouth of the Yellowstone.
Okay. So the fort itself has a brief but pretty rich history. Now, we talked about the fact that it was a large one. You talked about buying 15 square miles of land?
15 miles square.
15 miles square of land. How big is the park today? How large is this facility today?
The park is about 157 acres total. About 75 of it lay on top of the bluff, with about another 75 down below the bluff itself. And that's where the event site took place, was down below the bluff, so that we would get a separation in time frames.
Very good. Yeah, and it's a dramatic place. But as we talk about, as we've visited a lot of these reconstructions, is the fact that now this is a reconstruction. This is not the original buildings that are here. And tell us a little bit about what happened in the ensuing years. You mentioned earlier that there was some agriculture taking place here, and tell us, if you would, then about how the evolution of the reconstruction coming to pass.
From the time that this area was settled in the mid-1850s until approximately 1960, this was a farm field. There, it was in private ownership. People would find various artifacts from the fort, so they knew that the site was here. In 1963, the area was purchased in a cooperative effort between the Nebraska Game Parks Commission and the Fort Atkinson Foundation. Then after that, it became a permanently staffed area. And reconstruction began in earnest in about 1978. And since that time, various structures have been built: the north, west, and south walls, powder magazine, sutler store, council house, of course, and also the armor shop.
And do you have a lot of festivals throughout the year? I know you've got some folks here who wear the uniform of the period and who do living history actions here. But what all goes on here through the course of the year?
We do have 6 living history events a year. All the interpretation that's done on site is all done on a volunteer basis, and we draw interpreters from Minnesota, South Dakota, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, and Iowa for the most part, and then some that come in also from Tennessee and as far away as California.
So you have pretty good steady flow of people throughout the year coming by to see the place?
In a normal year, which this is not a normal year, we average approximately 45,000 people a year through the facility.
How many did you have this week?
This last week we had 65,000. So it was, like I said, this has not been a normal year.
But it's been a good year. A lot of people have got to see the place.
Very good, and just appreciate all your efforts of that you and your folks are doing along to preserve the history of the expedition, and just really think that you've done a very fine job.
Well, thank you, John. I wasn't looking for a compliment, but I appreciate it. I'll tell you, it's been a great stay at Boyer Chute. Boyer Chute, the whole facility. I mean, it's just been wonderful, and we're going to talk a little bit about that before we get out of here too. But with the whole area here, really would encourage folks to that if you're going through Nebraska and you're looking for a route, make sure this is part of it, because it's a great stop. The town of Fort Calhoun has been extremely friendly. The folks here have been very pleasant. A tremendous community overall, and we thank you for being with us, John. And
Thanks again.
Do you have a website?
Yes, we do. It's part of the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission website. It's outdoornebraska.org.
All right, great, and we'll certainly put a link to that on our website as well. So,
okay.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to turn our attention for just a moment to our next guest, who is a fellow we're real happy to have with us. I had the opportunity to hear him speak down at Nebraska City the other day at the opening of the new Interpretive Center there, and we're going to be joined now by Matthew Sitting Bear Jones, a member of the Otoe-Missouria. Thank you, Matthew, for being here. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And as you notice, I am sitting. So.
How appropriate for you. First of all, I was going to ask, you are an educator with you're at the University of Nebraska Lincoln. I want to make sure I mention Lincoln.
Oh yeah, you mentioned the other ones and you'd be in trouble.
Okay, so at any rate, we are pleased that you came down, and this was, as I talked about at the beginning of the program, this is a significant week from the perspective of the journals. We obviously are what we do to follow this story is follow these journals that these men kept 200 years ago, and this was a big week for them, and it had a profound impact on both our worlds. Mm-hmm. What happened here. Certainly, I think we've talked a lot about the fact that it was the first contact that these emissaries of the United States government, the first emissaries of the United States government, had with Native Americans west of the Mississippi River. And it holds a lot of, there's a lot in this thing. There's a lot of emotion attached to what happened here. It's an important moment in history that it's hard to even get your hands around a little bit and understand what it means, and certainly what it meant then is difficult to fully comprehend. What it means to us today is complex, and certainly what it means for us in the future is, I guess, up to us, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But at any rate, could you, if you would, at least at a personal level, share what that first council means to you as a Otoe-Missouria?
Well, it was the first time that our people met the Americans. We'd met French and we'd met Spanish, and we had encounters in our history with them. But these new group of people coming in, we didn't know exactly what to expect from them. At this meeting, in the speech that was given, they talked about how the Great White Father, the president, had made the old fathers go away, and so and that so we kind of knew that they were gone, but we weren't too sad that the French were gone, because we didn't like the French much. They were real cheap, because they would. Our people were a giving people, and so when you give presents, and you expect presents to be given, and the French would make us, we would give presents to them, but they would make us buy things from them, so it wasn't a good relationship. The Spanish, we didn't have a lot of encounters with, because most of their expeditions didn't come this far. Now, there's a few that did come, but they were farther in our history. And so this new father that came in, we were interested to see what he would do, and we felt really good at the beginning, because they did give us presents, they did give us things, and didn't charge us for them and stuff like that. So, and the rhetoric that was used at the time, when one of our Mutarchi people, our Missouria people, were being sent out to find the rest of our people, the words that were used, that they were going to show that they had a good heart, that they were open to things, and so they were sending one of their people with us to show that they weren't meaning no harm. And so this was a good sign, and our people felt really good that this was going to be done. So our initial reaction was a positive. A little apprehensive at the beginning, but it turned out to be positive, because they were very cordial in what they were doing, and the way that we were accepted when we came into the camps. So at the beginning, we had a kind of a nice feeling.
And I think it's important. This is something we've talked with other people about a great deal, and we've talked about among ourselves, just those of us who are on the expedition now, who are trying to have a deeper understanding of it from their perspective. We've sat around the fire and talked about this, that the sense that the offer, the extended hand, the offer of friendship and all, from this 40 some odd individuals making their way up the river, we believe that there was a tremendous amount of heartfelt and genuine feeling about that, and certainly we live in a nation where sometimes things change, and administrations change, and policies change. When did it change for the Otoe-Missouria?
Well, it started changing a little while after, about 35 years afterwards. We started getting into the treaty. Well, actually, it was sooner than that, because 1817 was the first treaty that we signed with the United States, and it was William Clark who was the Indian agent at the time. And then in 1835, we signed the Chile-Duchesne Treaty, which gave up about 8 million acres of land. Also, that's when one of the reservations was, our reservation was formed. Then we signed another treaty, and at those two treaties, Clark was there. So we met, our people met Clark 5 times, basically, during this whole time period. And we were not very happy with him towards the end, as we were at the beginning. And when we got put on the reservation, then we had to give up some land to give up what they call a Nemaha half-breed reservation. Our reservations got smaller and smaller, and so 71 years after the initial meeting here at Council Bluffs, we were removed from Nebraska and sent to Oklahoma. So it was that quick.
75 years, and your people are removed from their land.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked you about this earlier. 200 years later, 200 years from that first meeting, maybe one of the first times since 1875 that so many Otoe-Missouria have been back together on this place. And I know that you are from Red Rock, but you live here in Nebraska now, teaching out at Lincoln. But you had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with people from the tribe who were here. What was the experience like this week for them?
Oh, my elders. It was very emotional. I know that one of my grandmas, just kind of first day was just walking around in a daze. I mean, she could see the things in her eyes. Her eyes were beginning to water, and as she felt this place, I had a lot of my relatives who really were just taken aback by this place, and knowing that our ancestors had walked this same land, knowing that we had hunted here in this land and lived, and they were really just overwhelmed. The younger ones weren't as overwhelmed, I don't think, because they didn't have as much of the impact of history, of our oral history as of the older ones is, because a lot of these, like me, we've been influenced by the people that were born either at the time of removal or just very shortly after the removal, and so we were brought up on the stories of Nebraska, and it's just awe-inspiring to be here and to see this ground, know that some of our great chiefs walked this ground, and
Do you think it's been a good, helpful, healing experience?
I think it has. I think that it really opened up a lot of hearts in our people that may have been bitter, because back home there's a lot of people that dwell on the negative a lot, and so this experience for them probably was a lot better, and it may have healed some of that bitterness. And to be back where your ancestors walked.
You brought some artifacts with you today that are specific really to, well, some of the things are not specific to Otoe-Missouria totally, but I mean there are some things that are, and if you would certainly like to have you share those things and explain their significance in the tribe. In fact, if we are we looking at those things now? If we can go ahead and okay, we can let's walk over there.
Okay, basically, this is a replica of the eagle feather, and which is the great symbol for religious purposes for our people. And if you have a picture of the monument, you'll see that on the Otoe-Missouria in their hat they have two eagle feathers hanging out the back of them, because this is the most revered bird in our culture. And then I just have another little prayer feather of a hawk feather that we use. This is sage. This is one of our sacred sacraments that we use in our ceremonies. Then this is a hat. This is the style of hat that they wore after about mid 1800s and after. They started wearing these beaver and otter skin hats. And you'll notice that on the monument, on the statues, they have this style of hat. So this is a later edition. This is when we started adapting to the plain style of living that we got this hat. Also, we have the sweetgrass, which is another sacramental thing that we use in our prayer ceremonies and our stuff like that. Then our leggings, deerskin leggings, basically. Most people don't realize that our people, and like the Poncas, the Pawnees, the Omahas, we didn't wear a lot. I mean, everybody looks.
We've been adapting that style ourselves since we've been here.
And everybody wears. I mean, everybody's had images of the Indian as the buck-skinned, full war bonnet. We didn't wear that. We didn't have that. And actually, the statues that you have there are later adaptations. They are mid-1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s dress. That's not the way we dressed when we met Lewis and Clark, or even up to about 1850. If you look at two artists, one came with Stephen Long in his expedition called Seymour, and then the other one was Bodner, who came with Prince Maximilian. They were about 12, 13 years apart, and the clothes and the styles never changed. So we know pretty well that that's what they looked like when they met Lewis and Clark. They had shaved heads, they had a little top notch on top, they wore maybe necklaces here, a blanket, breechcloth, leggings sometimes, and moccasins, and that was it.
Well, I would just remind our viewers that today is August 5th, and we started the day, several of us, swimming in the river this morning in Boyer Chute to take a bath. It's not been really all that hot of a summer, and it's hot out. And really, I mean, what we keep sometimes forgetting is that people of all cultures and all for all time have had some degree of common sense. And when it's 100 degrees, there's no reason to wear a tremendous amount.
And the other thing that we wore is here is what they call a bear skin yoke. It just fits around you, kind of a little piece of covering. And a lot of our people wore them, and then they'd also wear the bear claw necklace. This particular animal, being as powerful as it is, if you could get this, you were some kind of man, because you couldn't go to Kmart and buy it. I mean, you had to go find the bear himself and go, "Hi, guy," and attack, and you had to fight him. And if you killed him, then you got the bear claws, and you got the skin, and then
even with a firearm, taking down a bear is not an easy task.
But most of the time, what we did, I mean, to prove our worthiness to be able to do
hand to hand, right?
It was hand to hand with a knife. We didn't use a rifle, and so if you see these men wearing these things, you know that they took him on mano a mano, and that was it. So these are just some of the things that we would have worn back in those days.
Right, and it's helpful for people to have sort of a visual image. Let's move back over here for just a moment. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I apologize, Jim, did we ever get a chance to really look at those images from the statue? Why don't we take a look at those now, and you can understand what it was that Matthew was talking about. If we look at the statue here, you'll see the monument that's set up here near Fort Atkinson of the first meeting, and it is an excellent large, massive piece of work. There's a number of different elements in it. Clark is writing in a journal. He's sitting there with who ostensibly is one of the interpreters, Fafung, or perhaps Dorian, who's here. They certainly know the French were with them for this, particularly those who had Otoe-Missouria heritage or Omaha heritage, like Labiche, for example. You see Lewis speaking there with several of the chiefs. I mean, this was a much larger gathering, of course, historically, but the statue that's here is a tremendous piece. But as you see, the headgear that Matthew's talking to there is a little different than and a little later period, but very massive piece. And the setting for this monument is really very nice. You walk out into the open field, and again, one of the highlights of the Fort Atkinson Park, and if you're in the area, certainly encourage you to get by here and take a look at it. There you can see it again. It's in its very rural setting, and we'll back off one more and see the entirety of it.
And you see that the two Otoes, like I said, this is a later dress because they have braids. This was not the dress of the time. They have shirts, so they didn't. That wasn't part of the dress of the time. But like I said, this is a later adaptation, late 1800s. We actually know when our people began to adapt to this because one of the Indian agents writes in his Indian agent journals the exact time that we started. He notices that we start switching to what he calls the Southern Plains or the Plains style of dressing. We start growing our hair long, and that kind of stuff. So we know exactly when we made that transition.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Let's start moving forward in time. We have a few minutes left, and were those transitions taking place because of the overall was there an overall cultural as Native Americans were being relocated and treated by the government in a relatively broad brush way, that many Native Americans were treated the same as the other Native Americans were, not really appreciating necessarily diets and things like this. Was there a reason in particular why that change took place? Was it just generally because of the amalgamation of the different native cultures?
No, basically what it started to become, I think you can see the despair that the people were starting to feel, the lack of self-esteem, alcoholism, even at that time, even in the 1830s, was beginning to start to really grab hold of our people. The agents at the time start writing about the extensive alcohol use by the people. So we can see a whole disintegration of the culture at that time. And as they try to look for things. I mean, it's just like today when kids start dressing like the barrio kids and they're living out in the country, or trying to dress like the modern more kids. Well, on the reservation, you start adapting when you have other Indians coming into the reservation to visit or to meet, and you start looking at their dress and you start picking things away and you start adapting yourself to a new style because you're not happy with your old style.
Right. We've got a few questions here, and I'd like to throw these at you. What kind of lifestyle did the Otoe-Missouria have 200 years ago?
They were farmers and earth lodge dwellers. We had teepees, but we didn't use them except to go buffalo hunting. They were kind of like our mobile home, and
kind of like Jim's RV, huh?
Yeah, and so but our villages were the average size of a earth lodge was about 40 feet across. There were some that were bigger, there were some that were smaller, but about the average of 40 foot. Then the farmland ran from the village on out, and usually some of the Indian agents have written that the farmland extended out at least 5 miles away from the village. And so you would have plots of land which would be assigned to each family or whatever, and then just keep moving out farther and farther away.
And was this a horse culture?
Yes, it was. We had horses. Part of our wealth was considered horses, but before that it was dogs. I mean, how many dogs you own, that's how wealthy you were, and how many horses you own, that's how wealthy you were. We also were what did one call it? More than one wife, but you had better be able to support more than one family.
Okay, right. There is a question from one of our internet viewers asking about the significance of the blanket, and I'll let you go ahead and answer that. It's something, the blanket tradition is something I was made familiar with a few years ago, and why don't you share that with our viewers?
This blanket is a replica of the Hudson Bay trade blanket, and this was one of the blankets that we had gotten from the French. when they were trading with us. So we wear this blanket, and even in some of the historic sketches, you'll see the Hudson Bay blanket in those sketches and those films. So that's why I wear this blanket, is so that it keeps us within the period of the time.
And I believe that it's worn over the one shoulder by the man and over both shoulders by the woman.
Right. The one shoulder ripped over and held here. That way you have your hand open to, show that you have no weapons and that you can greet people. For the women, it's draped over both. It's open fully and then draped over the both women. On both shoulders, so that she can hold it that way.
One of the questions was, Otoe-Missouria children today, are they learning their language, or is the language being preserved? I guess, in fact, I'd like to ask a broader question, and that is, how are things at Red Rock? What's happening at Red Rock today?
Well, Red Rock is...
By the way, for our viewers, Red Rock, Oklahoma is where the tribe is centrally located today.
Red Rock is like any other reservation. We're out in the rural community. Basically, all the reservations are out in rural community. So a lot of people that are in rural settings can relate. We have the same economic disadvantages that any rural community has, but we also, being a reservation, have other aspects of it. Economics, we don't have the facilities to put a business on our reservation.
Do you have a casino?
Yeah, we just got one. Well, we had before that. Actually, we had what we had a bingo hall. And it was funny because that bingo hall, we would bus people in from 5 or 6 states. We were having $1 million weekends bingo. So we put the Catholics to shame, And
it is funny that we do live in a society where we can actually start to laugh about some of these things, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And then we that building got old. And so we got out of that business, and now it's a storage facility. And it's really a nice storage facility because it sits halfway between Stillwater and Ponca City. So a lot of companies come and store their dry goods there, and then they don't have as far to go if they have to go to both cities, if they got businesses they deal with in both cities. Then we built a new bingo hall. And the bingo hall's been up and been running and is starting to be very successful. We have a couple of other enterprises. We have a gas station, commodity store type of thing there, and then we've got.
Is there a practice of agriculture going on the reservation?
Not among our people. Most of our people have pretty much leased out our land to farmers. And so we've leased, and here lately we've found that a lot of times. Like I had a leaser that was he was with our family 3 generations. I don't have him anymore. His family finally got out of the business. It's too hard for him, and so now I got a new leaser, and we're finding that to happen. Is that a lot of our land is being leased by new people now, and the old farmers that we used to work with either died off or their families have not, kind of like rural communities now. Young kids don't want to go back to the farm. They want to stay away from that, and that's what they're doing.
What about the language and cultural issues? Are you finding a resurgence among the young people with regard to their interest in it and preservation of cultural tradition?
Well, we've had a small semblance of that in some of our sacred ceremonies. The clans would call the clan people together, and the children would come and take part in our annual powwow that happens the 3rd weekend in July. We would bring some of that stuff in. We have a cultural committee which is made up of all of our clan leaders, and so they try to put things together for the people to participate in. We still try in some resemblance of continuing the language, but the language is being lost because we lost our last full speaker about 10 years ago, and so it's real hard to teach a language when you don't have someone around that knows the whole language to be able to talk to.
I had a conversation with Jim Goodtrax down at the Iowa reservation about that, and he's doing a lot for that tribe, and it is a difficult thing. And I know many non-natives, many whites who come from particular cultures in Europe certainly can appreciate that as well. My family came from Scotland, and very few people speak Gaelic there anymore, and so it's one of those things that I think that the steps that some of the tribes are taking now to preserve language is just tremendous, and it's great that the that so many folks in the Native community are really in a position now to actually affect that as well. So we're going to have to wrap it up here, and I really want to thank you, and I also want to thank you for your service. You're a Vietnam veteran, served in Vietnam and as in the Army, of course, and of course he was in the Army, and you know how I feel about that. And at any rate, and in the Cav too. So we appreciate your service to the country, and on behalf of the Discovery Expedition, welcome home.
Thank you very much.
And once again, ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Sitting Bear Jones. We were very fortunate today to have folks from Fort Wilkinson here, John from Fort Atkinson, rather. And want to thank everybody for joining us again. Thank you for your email questions. Next week, we're going to be coming to you live from Ottawa, Iowa. We're going to be visiting with the folks there that at the Lewis and Clark Center there, with the some display replica keelboats that are located there, and we're excited to talk with those folks as we move on up the river. Until then, we proceed on.